Welcome to the pre-show, everyone. If you're watching this on the replay, you can fast forward about 10 minutes, or you can just hang out and watch the pre-show as I put things into the chat room so that people will know we are live. If you're watching this live on YouTube, you might want to go over to professormesser.com/live and join us in the chat room, because you'll notice there's no chat on YouTube. One of these days, I'm going to integrate all these things together. Well, they sort of are integrated on one page, but it would be nice to have the chat on the Facebook page, wouldn't it? I'm just saying. Let's change the bar at the top of the page to say that we are now live. Let's see. What's it say now? It says, My Free Network Plus Study Group is right now. Click here to join us. Join Gus. I don't know who Gus is, but we need to join him. Click here to join us. Reset the cookie. Save the changes. And boom. All right. That part's done. Oh, boy. Let's see how the stream goes today. I may have to turn off the bird feeder, which is right there. Let's get a good shot of the bird feeder, shall we? Here we go. Let's do a camera check in general. Let's see if we can see what's going on there. See, I'm getting buffering on there. Everything looks good with cameras. Been getting that, though. I wonder if I am having local problems. Although I just did a speed test and it looked really good. So I don't think it's me. It could be that machine that it's on, though. It could be the streaming server needs a little bit of something at birdfeeder.live. Are we even hearing it? We aren't even hearing it anymore because I didn't play. There we go. Now it's live. It was me. It's me, everybody. Welcome, everyone. I'm waiting for the things to go out, the notices to go out. You got to notice when I went live. I'll see the primary stream. No, it's all good. Got to notice when we went live, and then 5 minutes before all this starts up, I send out the emails and I send out the tweets and the Google Plus notifications and the Facebook notifications and all those good things. So we'll see another group of people show up about then. We're buffering again with the bird feeder. I'm going to have to check that out today. That'll be something for me to do. You'll notice on professormesser.com/live there are links to things like the live Q&A, which you'll see right there. There's our live Q&A. Where's me in the live Q&A? My head's not there. What good is it if my head's not there? I need to get rid of bookmarks so you have more room on this page to see things. There we go. The question to start with, how tall must you be to ride Walt Disney World's Space Mountain roller coaster? I see a number of you are Googling. Stop Googling. Take a guess. This one really doesn't count, though, does it? I think we're all right. I don't think we have to worry too much about the Google. Just get the question answered. Okay, what's the temperature in here? It needs to be cooler. It needs to be nice and cold. Let's change that. What else we got going on? What else is happening? Hi, everybody. Hi, chat room. It's very quiet in the chat room. Dun, 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 dun. I've got it'll go out in about a minute. We'll get the notification sent out. I think I'm ready. I think I am. I got presentation ready to go. The questions are ready to go. The call-in lines, I guess I could bring up Skypey on my side and be ready for it. So that's good. Got Skypey ready to go. And what else? Hello, Florida. Hello from Florida. Florida. And Michigan. Lots of Florida today. It is nice in Florida today, isn't it? Bring up the bird feeder. We'll see Florida again. Birdfeeder.live. That is Florida today. That's my backyard today. It's very nice. It's not raining. Got a big yellow spot in the middle of it. There we go. Not a lot of birds, though. Sure, the whole point of having is a little hot, a little muggy. It's a lot muggy. People who don't live here don't know about the mugginess, about all that nonsense. And yet here we are. All right. Notifications. Did they go out? Let's see. Let's check the tweeter. Yep. That looks good. Looks very, very good. And Chicago, welcome. Utah connection. Very nice. No, I really don't have a Utah connection. Not myself, no. Nope, I have always lived in Florida. I have never left Florida. I've always lived here. I've worked other places, sort of. I've worked out of companies that were headquartered in other places. And I have had territories that were everything from Florida as a state to international, to the eastern United States, to the whole United States. But now it's really what you see on the screen is what it is now. This is my territory. This is it. Nothing else. There's a little bit of else outside the door there. We got 3 minutes. 3 minutes until we begin. So check all of those things. And we will get started. Got some good questions. Network Plus today. For those that don't know, I need a lower third that says, here's what we're doing today. Recordings are going here. Recordings are going on the YouTube. Let's make sure presentations are working. This is not powered up. We need some power. This power's bad boy. There we go. So much better. And play. Yeah, that works. That works. How are we doing? Well, everybody's joining now. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, everybody. We're going to get started in just a moment. See how much we know about Network Plus today. How much do we know? Well, we're going to find out about Network Plus and apparently about roller coasters. Make sure you go to ProfessorMesser.com/QA to participate in the question and answer. Where did I get my Socrative question from today? I make up every Socrative question. I don't get it from somewhere. I write them. Every question you get from me, I write. So if you're reading a question I wrote and you think this question is awful, that's because I wrote it. I mean, if you think the question is really good, you can thank me for writing a really good question. I cracked myself up. Oh, if you people saw the emails I get every day. It's delightful. Most are pretty good, though. It is kind of funny. There's a reason for it. There's always a reason for my Socrative questions. So you'll know more in just a moment. 1 minute. 1 minute. Get started. Coffee's on deck. I could probably use another. We got a new Singer's Saving Grace. This is the Singer's Soothing Throat Spray. This one is honey lemon. Honey lemon. Honey lemon. And let's try that one. It's got a little bite to it. But you could see how much better that sounds now. See, fixed everything. Thankfully, no. 30 seconds. 30 seconds. I guess we should get some things ready. We'll click a button. See, this is what's going to come up next. Get to see it right in front of me. It's also up on my screen. I'm seeing it up there. So you see me often look up. That's what that's about. I hardly ever look down. I don't know why I have these, but there they are. I do know, because not always. That big setup that I have in front of me, the big one, I don't always have, so that's good. Hello, Shandor. Minnesota. Greetings. New Hampshire. I like that. All over today. Well, it's about time, isn't it? Let's get something going here. Let's do a study group. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Professor Messer Live Network Plus Study Group for August of 2017. It could be really much better if you see me. There we go. Hi, everybody. I've almost figured out how all of these buttons work. And so now we're able to have a study group. This is our monthly study group that I'm able to do for Network Plus. We do one of these every month. Last month we did A+. Last week we did A+. This week we do Network Plus. Next week we do Security Plus. So we try to rotate through these. And of course, in this first hour, I will be asking you questions that come directly from the Network Plus exam objectives. If you're studying for your Network Plus exam, this will be something you want to sit for the next hour. We'll do this Q&A. I will not only ask these questions and have you answer them, and you can see how to answer them at professormesser.com/QA, but I will also explain why the questions were right and why the questions were wrong. So that might help a number of you who are struggling through trying to figure out a lot of these things about the exam. We'll talk more about that live Q&A in just a moment. I want to thank everybody for joining us, for watching the replays, for supporting the website. You can always keep an eye of what's going on at professormesser.com/Twitter, /YouTube, /Facebook, /Instagram. Just type in your favorite third-party website after putting in professormesser.com and it'll get there. Also, remember, don't pay full price for your vouchers. If you're a student, you probably want to go to the academic store where you get a significant discount. But if you're not a student, you don't have an EDU email address, you can go to professormesser.com/vouchers and get a discount instead of paying full price for any of your CompTIA exams. Also want to remind you that my Network Plus course is available to watch online. Every minute of every video is there. You can watch the entire course and get completely trained for absolutely free. Some of you would like to have an offline version. You're not always connected to the internet. You would like something to take with you. You want some MP3 files. You want the course notes that are included. I bundled all of this together. You can learn more about that at professormesser.com/getnetplus. There's also questions online, professormesser.com/popquiz. I've got some Network Plus questions. It's really an archive of some of the questions that we have done on our study group. So if you wanted to have it more in an exam type format, it's a great way to do it. Go to professormesser.com/popquiz for all of those free questions. I've also got podcasts available. A lot of you like watching the video replay of these study groups, but a number of you have said it would be nice if I got an audio-only version. And so you can find an audio-only version, a podcast version of the A+, Network Plus, and Security Plus study groups at professormesser.com/podcasts. Podcasts. I mentioned that you will be able to answer questions in real time, and I'll be able to see these questions pop up on my screen. It is all done through magic. Look just like this. No, it's using a service called Socrative. Socrative is a nice little service that allows you to answer these questions live and online. I will progress through the questions, and you'll be able to answer them either inside of your browser by opening a new browser window or by using an app that's available on your mobile device. You can easily do this by going to professormesser.com/QA. That's an easy way to get right to the question. You can also go to Socrative.com, click the student login, and go to room name Professor Messer. That's also the room name you would use if you're using the mobile device, the Socrative student app. And make sure you spell it right, PROFESSORMESSER. And you'll have a question sitting there waiting for you. So that's something we'll talk about in just a moment. I'll give you a moment to get into the room. You can see the question that's there. If you don't see a question that's there, you're not in the right room. So go to professormesser.com/QA. That'll get you there. We are going to talk about the current exam, which is the N10006 exam. This exam was released on February 28th, 2015. So we expect it will be updated in about 3 years, which means February of 2018. We got a little bit less than a year than we might expect it to be available. Sometimes it takes a little bit longer for CompTIA, but I'm giving you kind of the 3-year mark because that at least gets you in a planning phase for doing something like this. Even if they release a new version of the exam in February of 2018, they tend to give months and months of overlap. So we will still be able to take the N10006 at this time next year. So as we sit here in August of 2017, you'll probably still be able to take this in August of 2018. But just keep checking in with CompTIA. They'll tell you what's going on. Never wait to get certified. Don't wait for a new version. You absolutely want to go and take the exam that's available. There's all upsides to taking this exam and getting certified and getting that job. Don't wait for an exam, a new exam version to come. You need to get certified today. Don't wait for something like that. Now, if you're joining us at professormesser.com/QA, there's a question waiting for you. And the question is, how tall must you be to ride Walt Disney World's Space Mountain roller coaster? You can't even see the castle there because I'm a big head. There it is. So there's in Walt Disney World in Orlando, Florida, in Kissimmee, Florida, there's the Space Mountain roller coaster, one of the more popular roller coasters in the world. And I'm asking you how tall you have to be to ride that roller coaster. If you think you know the answer, go to professormesser.com/QA. Taller than a dwarf. That's a really good answer, but I'm not sure how tall a dwarf is. So we'll ask one of the 7 and see what they have to say. So what you will see if you go to Socrative are these answers: 41 inches, 42 inches, 43, 44, 45, and 46. How tall do you have to be? Now, I'm not expecting that you know this. This is obviously not a Network Plus question. This is really a question to get us started. Make sure that you can get into Socrative. Make sure that you can answer the questions. Hope some of you have Googled the answer. I know you did. And that's okay. Do not Google during the live event, during the actual Network Plus questions, though. Take a stab and see if you happen to know what the answer is on this one. And as I've mentioned before on other study groups, do not put the answer in the chat room, or do not put your guess into the chat room. Often what's put into the chat room isn't a very good answer anyway. So what is the right answer for this one? Well, the answer is that you must be 44 inches tall to ride Space Mountain in the Magic Kingdom. And there's my head's cutting off a picture of Space Mountain. There it is. There's from outside the park. You can see Space Mountain spires going up there, 44 inches. And the reason I mention this is that today, August the 16th, 2017, as we sit here recording this live, is National Roller Coaster Day. So this is the time for roller coasters. On this day, if you want, this is the day you go out and ride a roller coaster. I guess that's what that is. I'm not sure exactly. But it seemed to fit well with what we were doing. So 44 inches is the right answer. 34% of you Googled and got the right answer of 44 inches. And so if you answered D on that one, you got it absolutely right. That was a good test, I think. We've got some other questions for you today. One of the things that I like to do as we get into the Network Plus questions now is I want to, at least at the beginning of our study group, ask you a question that CompTIA considers to be a performance-based question. CompTIA, of course, on their exams provide you with many multiple choice questions. We're all familiar with multiple choice questions, but CompTIA also gives you questions that are not multiple choice questions. These could be fill in the blank. They could be matching. They could be presenting you with a command prompt and you have to perform a function. They may be asking you to put things in a particular order from slowest to fastest, any one of those things. But what I want to do today is kind of a matching function, or it's more of a fill in the blank. So I have a performance-based question to kick things off. And here's the performance-based question. I want you to assign an OSI layer to each of these functions. And that's what it says. Even though my head is cutting that off over here on the screen, there's really an S there. Assign an OSI layer to each function. There's a colon, I guess, right there. So all you have to do when you're answering this on Socrative is just give me a number. If you think all of these are OSI layer 1, then you can answer 11111. And you've answered it. If you think they're maybe 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, you can answer 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And just put that into Socrative, and you'll be able to answer that up. Some people are trying to answer right now with some of these. So I want you to look at what that particular function is and give me the OSI layer. The functions are: define a static route to a remote site, use a repeater to extend a network connection. What layer is that? Configure a firewall to allow traffic using TCP 443, send an email to a coworker, and enable STP. So I want you to tell me what OSI layers those are associated with, those 5 different functions. And this is a little different than knowing what happens at each layer, I really extrapolated out another piece of this, didn't I? I really took something that's happening in the real world, something you're doing on your network, something you're configuring on a firewall or configuring on a router or a switch or a device. And I'm asking you, what layer of the OSI model is that really based upon? Maybe you happen to know by looking at these. And a number of people are putting these in here. This is also one you can't Google. This is one you're not going to be able to Google and get the right answer for these. You're going to have to look at each one of those and figure out what OSI layer is associated with that. And this is one on the Network Plus exam objectives. You are expected to know a lot about the OSI layers. So make sure you go through and do that. You don't have to write out everything in your answer, by the way. You can just give me a number. Just give me 5 numbers. They could all be the same number. They can all be different numbers. There could be some duplicates. One of those. So you just try to figure out what that happens to be. Again, don't answer in the chat room. Go to professormesser.com/QA. So I put that there. It takes you right to the question. So easy to be there, right in the question. Be able to work through that. If you are watching this live on YouTube, I'll also remind you that we've got a live chat that I am watching on professormesser.com/live. You can always join us there. The video is embedded on that page, so you're getting the live video, you're getting the live chat, you're getting the best of everything right there on that page. So let's see how we did with this one. Let's look at the answers. I think how many people have answered this one? Quite a few. You've all taken this test. A lot of you have not, by the way. A lot of you are sitting this one out. Like, I have no idea. So let's figure out what the answers are. Here we go. So here they are, layer 3, 1, 4, 7, and 2. So let's step through each one of these. I'll explain my thoughts as we go through this. So the first function was define a static route to a remote site. Anytime you're talking about a router, an IP address, anything that the router is doing, that's a layer 3 device. In fact, often we'll refer to a firewall that's routing as performing a layer 3 function. So often you can take the word router and simply swap it with layer 3 device, and that's effectively the same thing. That's why you hear about layer 3 switches. It's not really a switch anymore. It's doing routing functions as well. So the switch has a layer 3 capability associated with it. So if you're defining a static route, that's a layer 3 function. So that's why we stuck layer 3 right there on the first function. The second one is use a repeater to extend a network connection. Repeaters are simply taking a signal, regenerating it, and sending it along its way. The repeater has no idea if this is web traffic, if it's a file transfer, if it's voice over IP, nor does it care. All it's doing is regenerating the signal. Anytime you look at the signal going across the network and just the signal, that's clearly a layer 1 physical layer. So that's why I put layer 1 for that function. The third one is configure a firewall to allow traffic using port TCP443. A lot of firewalls will operate at different layers of the OSI model, but I gave you a very specific qualifier here. You were configuring this firewall to allow a particular port number, a TCP or a UDP port number. That transport is really talking about OSI layer 4. So that layer, that's the reason layer 4 is right there next to it, is because whenever you talk about TCP or UDP, that's a TCP layer 4 function. We don't have a lot of other layer 4 protocols that we're using these days. We're no longer using SPX, for example, to be able to do anything with the layers. So that's why anything you see that says TCP or UDP, you should automatically think layer 4. Next one is send an email to a coworker. This is us typing something in at the screen. If we're seeing the application operate, we're seeing something on the screen, then that's always going to be layer 7, the application layer. And finally, enable STP. Well, you have to know that STP is the spanning tree protocol. And configuring the spanning tree protocol is something that will be done on a switch. Spanning tree protocol operates at the MAC address layer of Ethernet. So we know that that must be something related to layer 2. Anytime we're dealing with a switch, it's layer 2. Anytime we're dealing with a router, it's layer 3. So that's why. So could enable STP be layer 7? If you're using a program on a PC to do the enabling, well, it would not be. Technically, if we look at it that way, everything is layer 7. So that particular extrapolation doesn't work very well. We're really talking about the function. Where does this capability function? And that would really be layer 2. That's what STP is all about. That's what we're getting at. And it's one of those that once you start working with switches and routers and firewalls, and you go to meetings and you're all talking about where the problems are occurring and where we can optimize different things, we will start using that layer 7, layer 4, layer 3, layer 2 terminology. So it will be pretty easy to figure out how we approach these particular problems and affect them. So if you answered layer 3, layer 1, layer 4, layer 7, and layer 2, did a good job on that one. Nice. I think these OSI model questions are a little bit difficult. If you've never sat down with a network, you've never worked with protocols, you've never optimized an application or watched the operation of spanning tree or routes, it's a little difficult to conceptualize. So make sure you become more familiar with those. It's certainly something that could come up. It is in the Network Plus exam objectives, so make sure you know about it. Let's do another question. Now let's jump over to some multiple choice. This one will be a little bit easier for all of us. Remember, no answering in the chat room. You can have which of these would be the most common way to propagate VLAN configuration changes across multiple switches. Let's go to this next question. You'll see this pop up in your Socrative. Just stay in one screen and you'll see the question will automatically change right underneath you. You don't have to do anything. So which of these would be the most common way to propagate VLAN configuration changes across multiple switches? Would it be 802.1q? Would it be SNMP? Would it be STP? Would it be VTP? Would it be PoE? Yeah, you know me. So that's the way you can go about looking at propagating VLAN configuration changes across multiple switches. This is something you'll probably end up doing. I'm almost sure of it when you start working through this. What would it be? And remember, no answering in the chat room. You want to instead go to professormesser.com/QA, and that will take you right to the question. You'll be able to answer that one. What would be the most common way to propagate VLAN changes across multiple switches? This is something you should probably even know without it being multiple choice. You should know, oh, I know how to do that. I know what does that. I know the process for making that happen, and be automatically able to do that. I'm going to take a sneak peek on my side and see if we know. I don't think we really know. Well, this is also a difficult one to Google because I've kind of done it backwards. You would have to Google now every single one of the answers, and we shouldn't be Googling. We should just be taking a guess, because that's what's going to happen on your exam, of course. There's no Google. You're in a room, it asks you a question, and now you have to figure out the pieces of it. In the chat room, people are saying, should I be using Packet Tracer for Network Plus? It's not required for the Network Plus exam objectives. It might help you understand more about the way networks operate. If you really wanted to understand, how does spanning tree work? What do these routers look like? That's one way to do it, but I think it's a little bit out of scope for the Network Plus exam. You could spend days configuring things in Packet Tracer, but ultimately the Network Plus exam doesn't require that level of detail. Let's see how we did with this question. Which of these would be the most common way to propagate VLAN configuration changes across multiple switches? Let's see how we did. And we're just all over the place on this one. And I think it's a four-way tie. Nobody said PoE. Only 3% of you said PoE. But 29%, a tie for first between SNMP and VTP. We've got in second place, 22% said 802.1q and 17% said STP. Well, this brings up a good question about propagating changes when you're dealing with VLANs. In a lot of environments, you've got a lot of switches, you've got a lot of VLANs. If you were going to make a change to your VLANs, you would have to go to every single switch and log in. Or you could do it automatically. And automatically would be using something like VTP, the VLAN Trunking Protocol. That's because if you're trying to go across, you got 100 switches. Do you want to log in to 100 switches and make a single change to all 100 switches? Or would you prefer maybe just setting it in one switch and having that change propagate itself automatically? This is something that is done using VTP. That's why VTP was created, the VLAN Trunking Protocol. That is a Cisco terminology. If you're in a Cisco world, that's what you'll run into. If you're outside the Cisco world, you may be using something like MVRP, which is the Multiple VLAN Registration Protocol, which effectively does the same thing. You've got a single switch, and you've got to log into every single switch and configure every single one manually if you don't have any type of VTP configured on these switches. It's a lot easier if you could just go to a single switch, make the change, and then just sit back as the switch itself propagates that change across to all of the other switches that are in your network. You don't have to log into all of those switches. It makes it so much easier to be able to work. That's one of the enormous values of VTP. That could save you a lot of time and a lot of effort. So if we look at what we answered, 28% of us, I try to get at least 50%. So I didn't make my 50% on this one. If you answered D, VTP, got this one absolutely right. Now, 30%, we even had a new number one was SNMP, the Simple Network Management Protocol. And although SNMP could technically be used to make configuration changes on switches, routers, and other devices, it's not commonly done that way for a number of different reasons. The most common way to propagate VLAN configuration across multiple switches is with VTP. SNMP doesn't propagate anything. SNMP would still have to go to each individual switch, make the configuration change, and then go to the next switch along the way. So that would not be a good answer to use for this particular question. A is 802.1q. 802.1q is a trunking protocol, but it's only used on two sides of a connection between switches to be able to tunnel information between those switches, be able to tunnel different VLANs between those switches. It doesn't propagate VLAN configuration changes at all. It may change itself based on configuration changes, but it's not going to send those configuration changes through. We also had STP as one of the answers, the spanning tree protocol. We just talked about spanning tree. Spanning tree's primary use is to block layer 2 loops on your network, and that is not something that will propagate VLAN configuration changes at all. It's not what STP is used for it anyway. And nobody really bit on answer E, which is PoE, Power over Ethernet, which powers separate devices. That would not be the right answer either. And not a lot of you answered that one, so you must have already been on to me for that one. If you did answer D, VTP, the VLAN trunking protocol, you got that one absolutely right. Well done. Let's go to another question, though. I've got plenty more here to go through. Let's see if I can get to the next question. Let's see if I can choose that. Here is the next question on our list. What type of encapsulation is common on DSL networks? Maybe you have a DSL network. You probably already know the answer to this one. What type of encapsulation is common on DSL networks? This is one if you're working almost in any environment these days. You've got a DSL network coming in. Even if you have a separate MPLS, you've got a separate, maybe a cable modem connection coming in, it's very common to install a DSL connection as a backup. So this is one you'll probably run into. So you'll need to plug that DSL connection into one of your routers, and then you need to tell the router how it's configured. What type of encapsulation is this using? Well, I have some options for you. Would it be ISDN, PPPoE, 802.1q, MPLS, or HDLC? One of those is common on DSL networks. Maybe you know. What type of encapsulation is common on DSL networks? And if you do know, do not answer in the chat room. You want to go to professormesser.com/QA to be able to work through those. What encapsulation is common on DSL networks? This is one that you probably will run into. You don't really see it mentioned very much if you're at a home. If you got a DSL network coming into a home router, because those usually have a device that's provided by the network provider, by the DSL provider. And that modem, that DSL modem, the DSL router they give you probably just gives you an Ethernet connection. So the encapsulation's Ethernet. Well, we know that there's something else happening on the DSL side, though. And there will be times when you're simply given the phone wire and you have to configure a separate router to be able to handle that. This would be a great way to do it. What is commonly used? Well, let's see how we did with this one. Again, we got a kind of a tie for first. We've got ISDN at 33% and PPPoE at 37%. At a close second is MPLS at 22%. Only 8% said HDLC and only 3% said 802.1Q. So there's a number. We're kind of going past these three here: ISDN, PPPoE, and MPLS. One of those would be the encapsulation type most common to this, and a number of you did get this one right. The answer, PPPoE. This is point-to-point protocol over Ethernet, is exactly how this works. It's taken this PPP functionality and blended it together with an Ethernet connection, and now we've got PPPoE. Almost always seen on these DSL networks, by the way. Very, very common to see this on DSL networks. That's exactly the encapsulation that's most commonly used, and it's probably because it's so easy for the provider to configure. This DSL connection is a little bit of an unusual one for the provider. It's not an Ethernet connection. It's not always there. You can turn off your modem, of course, and it would go away. How does the provider's network equipment know to send you traffic over that link, over what effectively is a phone line? Phone lines don't operate the same way that Ethernet does. There's only two wires. So how are we going to make that work? So they've managed to take PPP, which is a very old technology, and integrate it into Ethernet so that we're able to have kind of a semi-online all the time / dial-up functionality all inside one little wire. Pretty interesting in the way that operates. And this is one of the nice capabilities of this, is that you can have a phone line coming in from one provider, but use an internet connection from somebody else. It's one of the advantages of being able to encapsulate that and have it available. So your local provider can give you that Ethernet, but you are also able to have your internet come from somebody completely different. I don't know that a lot of people implement it that way. I think most of the time you're getting your phone line connection and your DSL connection from the same provider, but you don't have to. So if we look at our answers, PPPoE, if you answered B, the 39% of you did get that right, would not be ISDN. ISDN, a completely different type of networking technology. Instead of DSL, you would have ISDN. ISDN uses this 2B plus D type connection, or it's run across an entire T1 type connection to be able to provide multiple phone lines. These days, we're doing a lot more voice over IP. We're seeing a lot less ISDN being used. Has some very niche functionality, so we still see it implemented in certain places. 19% of you said MPLS. The MPLS is another networking type that would replace DSL or replace ISDN, so that would not be an encapsulation type that would be used on DSL. HDLC is an encapsulation type, but it is not one that you commonly see on DSL networks. Instead, you probably would see that on traditional wide area network connections and being able to have that there. And 802.1Q, we just mentioned that in the previous question, is used for trunking VLANs between switches. So 802.1Q, and only 3% of you chose that one. Most of you knew that would not be 802.1Q as the encapsulation type that we would use on a DSL network. So if you did answer B, PPPoE, you got that one absolutely right. Well, how in the world are you supposed to keep track of all of these different technologies and all of these encapsulation types and all of these cables and all these fibers and all these wires and all these topologies? It's an enormous amount of information. What I've tried to do is take all of this information and make it available to you. And of course, I mentioned as you go through my videos, it's great if you take notes. But one of the things that I've already done for you is take notes myself. In fact, I've set up an entire set of course notes where I have now taken everything from my presentations that you see online, all of the text and all the graphics. This is something that's actually in its second version for the N10006. These are my course notes right here. Fully indexed. They're now, by next week, it'll actually also be available as a printed book for, I think, probably $30. It costs a lot to print in color. But I took all of the text and all of the graphics. So this used to be a document that was, I think, about 15 pages. So it's now 65 pages long. I took everything from my presentations, and it's in here now. Tons and tons of content. I'm very proud of this now. We really worked hard to give you something that would give you everything. So you now no longer have to write down any of the text, It's all in my course notes now. I took every bullet and I put it in here because that's what you were asking for. You wanted something that was comprehensive. There's nothing more comprehensive than that. Also, I will mention, a lot of people say, how can I help support the site? This is a great way to help support the site because every dollar that you invest in these course notes goes right back into keeping the website going. There's some huge changes updating on the website. We're growing rapidly. We have to get more servers and they have to be bigger. And of course, all of that costs money to keep it going. And I'm able to do that thanks to your support. Your purchase of this, every dollar goes in to help keep those things running. So thank you so much having that there, making those available in the Network Plus course notes. That's one that might actually come in handy, something you can do with that. So hopefully that would be something you can enjoy. You can find out more about it at professormesser.com/NPCN to learn more about the Network Plus course notes. Let's get another question. I've got one for you. Your security team has configured a firewall to allow UDP 138. Which of the following would be associated with this firewall rule? Sort of working backwards here, because usually they'll tell you what they're trying to do, and you as the network administrator or the firewall administrator have to configure the firewall to make that work. So how does it work now? So we've got a few options here. We've got, is it A, Windows data transfer? Is it B, voice over IP calls? Is it C, inbound email transfer? Is it D, encrypted terminal communication? Or is it E, automatic IP address configurations? One of those would be most associated with that firewall rule. Now, we know that these firewalls, these port numbers we put into a firewall, don't have to be directly associated with a well-known port and protocol. But in this particular question, we're asking exactly that. We're configuring UDP 138. What are we really configuring? It's going to be one of those. It should jump right out at you. And if it does, you can go to professormesser.com/QA and answer that question. If you're on the Socrative app, you can go to Professor Messer as the room name, PROFESSORMESSER, all one word, and be able to get into that room. It's a lot easier just to go to professormesser.com/QA. Now, if you're watching this in the replay, obviously, professormesser.com/QA is not something that's available. There will not be any questions there. You have to be here live to be able to participate with the live questions. And you can always go to professormesser.com/calendar to find out when the next live event will be. So let's see how we did. A number of you are just jumping right in with UDP 138. A number of you are Googling. I told you not to Google. Stop it. Put down the browser. Step away from the browser and answer the question. Let's see how we did. 41% said a Windows data transfer, 30% said voice over IP calls, 11% said an inbound email transfer, 14% said encrypted terminal communication, and 8% said automatic IP address configuration. So again, we're still not at that 50%. I'm working so hard to get us there. We're close though. I guess the highest one we have is 36% for Windows data transfer. Is that really the right answer for Windows data transfer? As you probably know, on the Network Plus exam, there are a lot of different port numbers you have to know. I've documented every single one of them in my videos, and I don't go outside the scope. I've seen people have pages and pages and pages of port numbers available. And one of the things that I really tell people is you only need to know what's in the exam objectives. They're probably not going to ask you any questions outside the scope of that. And trying to study things that are not in the exam objectives are certainly not a good use of your time. But on the exam objectives, UDP 138 is absolutely mentioned. And here are the lists of UDP 137, UDP 138, and TCP 139. These are commonly used in Windows to take the older traditional NetBIOS communication and encapsulate it into TCP/IP and send it on its way. This is when we started with back in the day with Microsoft. At that time, it was not Windows Server, it was LAN Manager is what it was called. We did not have TCP/IP. It was not something you would commonly see on people's network. And so there was no TCP/IP that Microsoft was using. Microsoft really didn't have their own transport protocol, so they effectively used something that was available to the world, which was NetBIOS, which was great. You could plug all your devices in through NetBIOS, and they could all talk to each other. However, NetBIOS is not a routable protocol. when you use it at that transport layer, really at layer 2. It's a layer 2 protocol at that point. It doesn't have a way to route. We really put in bridges to be able to take that information, which were the precursor to switches, to be able to send this across the network. But everybody was on the same broadcast domain. It was all the same subnet, if you will. We didn't have that IP term at the time. Everybody was on the same broadcast domain. Well, obviously, networking and computing in general became so much more popular. And we needed ways to start segmenting the network into smaller broadcast domains. But if we put a router between two devices, now Windows or LAN Manager would not work. So Microsoft was smart and said, okay, we'll get it to traverse the router by sticking it inside of a TCP/IP packet. And that's where these protocols showed up. Now we have UDP 137, UDP 138, and TCP 139, which takes those older NetBIOS ways of communicating, sticks it in TCP/IP so you can at least get it to the other side of the network. TCP or UDP 137 is the name service so that Microsoft can find those devices and populate names inside of Windows. You've got the NetBIOS datagram service running on UDP 138. That's when file transfers need to occur, but only use UDP. You don't need the TCP send and acknowledgement. But if you are Windows, you do need a TCP send and acknowledgement for the data. You would use TCP 139 to be able to do that. So both UDP 138 and TCP 139 transfer data. They just do it in different ways. They do it either as connection-less with UDP or connection-oriented with TCP. Now, these days, there are other ways to do this in Windows. We've gotten past the NetBIOS, but some of your older Windows systems will still use these technologies to be able to communicate back and forth. So that's one of those that can come in handy. This might be something you can really use in Windows. You'll notice these pop up. You realize, oh, there must be an older Windows machine on the network using some of these older protocols. So if we look at our question, your security team's configured a firewall to allow UDP 138. That indeed would be the 36% of you who answered A, Windows data transfer. Absolutely correct. You don't generally see voice over IP calls occurring on port 138, although it is common to see voice over IP calls occurring using the UDP protocol, because why would you need to get an acknowledgement back? You can't resend the data for voice over IP. It's too late. Otherwise, we just hear stuttering. We hear parts of the conversation coming back into our ear, and that's why we use UDP. But it's not on port 138 is not where we hear voice over IP calls commonly. Inbound email transfer usually done on SMTP, and that does not use UDP 138. Encrypted terminal communication, something like SSH, does not use UDP, and it does not use port 138. And automatic IP address configurations is DHCP, and that's, again, does use UDP, but it uses UDP broadcast. It does not use UDP 138, however, to be able to do that. So if you ever see UDP 138, you should automatically know that's something Windows related, something NetBIOS related, probably connectionless because it's using UDP, and it would certainly be a data transfer. It'd be the only thing in this list that would be most commonly associated with that particular port and protocol. So if you answered A, got that one absolutely right. Well done. Well done, well done. Yes, those in the chat room talking about the course notes, thank you. Yes, if you purchase the course notes, you have the older version, the 15 or 25-page version, and you're like, I need the 65-page version. You've already bought it. You can log into your member login at professormesser.com/members and download the latest version because you already bought it. Got a free upgrade. How about that? Let's do another question. Got one available for you right here. The question is, this is a video, a picture daily double, I guess. So we've got, which of the following would best describe this cable? Which of the following would best describe this cable? And of course, I'm not asking you what the cable is. That would be way too easy. Instead, I have a list of things here that would best describe this cable. I'll come back to the picture in just a moment. So which would it be? Would it be that the network connects sites that are 2 kilometers apart? I realize those of you watching the podcast or listening to the podcast, this doesn't help very much. The answer B is the maximum network throughput is 1 gigabit per second. C is that the network is part of a manufacturing facility. D is the network extends over a body of water. And E is that an underground 10-kilometer link is required. One of these would best describe this cable. I'll show you the picture of the cable again. I think I have a better picture here too. I'll show you this one. There we go. There's a better picture of that cable. Now I'm giving you these questions, and you'll notice this question, there might be 3 or 4 of these that you might say could be associated with this cable in these answers. You will often see this on the exam, where you will see a set of answers that could technically be right. So which one do you choose? Well, we look at the question. The question was, which of the following would best describe this cable? So there's something about this cable that fits best with one of these answers. And it really is one of these cases where things should jump right out at you. If you're looking at a question on the exam and you're thinking it could be 2 or 3 of these, then there's something you're missing about what they're trying to tell you, because the answers really do jump right out at you. The one that's correct should automatically be at the top of the list. There is nothing that you should vacillate on. There's no way you would go back and forth over, is it A, is it C, is it B, is it D? I'm not sure. Could be one. It should be obvious. And in this case, this one I think is very obvious which one it is, because you should be able to look at that cable, know what kind of cable is this? When do I use this cable? How does this work into my network? When would I engineer this into using this on my network? It's got to be one of these answers that's here in this list. And maybe you folks know what this cable is and how it works and how it would work. This is one wherever I start looking at the questions, it becomes a little bit more challenging. But you should be able, in the chat room, they're even saying, I know which ones it isn't. So you should be able to get rid of the ones that it isn't. So that would leave you with the ones that could possibly be. And again, that's one of those cases where you really do need to work through what could the problem be? What could the issue be? What were they trying to tell me on the exam? That's where you should focus your efforts on here as well. So definitely work through that piece and have all of those there. Let's see how we did. And remember, no mentioning the answers in the chat room or any hints, please, because then you get muted, and I hate that when that happens. Which of the following would best describe this cable? How do we do? Here we are. Well, we've got 47%, almost the 50% that I try to get to whenever I work on these questions, say that B, the maximum network throughput, is 1 gigabit per second. We also have 38% that said the network is part of a manufacturing facility, and everything else is very low. Only 10% said the network connects sites that are 2 kilometers apart, 4% said the network extends over a body of water, and 3% said that an underground 10-kilometer link is required. So that's one whenever you start looking at these, we're really between B, which is the maximum network throughput's 1 gigabit per second, and C, the network is part of a manufacturing facility. So let's see what this cable is first, and we should be able to break down what all of these things are. Now, you've probably seen this picture before. It's in my videos, and it's this picture on the bottom right here. Here it is. This is the cable that we were just talking about. We just had the picture of, a little different than the one on the top. The cable on the top is unshielded twisted pair, UTP. It doesn't really have much shielding on it at all. Doesn't have any shielding technically in it, period. The plastic that's around it doesn't really count as shielding. And you'll notice the one that we were talking about, the picture you saw, has this metal shield around it. All of there are even some STP, shielded twisted pair, where there are pieces of shielding around each pair of cables to provide even more shielding on this. The reason we're having the shield here is that we're extending this cable probably in an environment that has a lot of interference associated with it. It probably has interference from other devices, from lights, from anything that would put out any type of RFI. So anything where you've got some radio interference, some electrical interference, anything like that is certainly going to be one that can give you a perspective of needing some type of extra shielding on the cable. That's a perfect opportunity to use a cable like this. So if we looked at our list, 47% said the maximum network throughput's 1 gigabit per second, but actually this cable, we don't even know looking at the cable if it's Cat 5, if it's Cat 6. It could even be more than 1 gigabit per second looking at it. But that, looking at the cable, we know by looking at the cable that it's got to be something that is not the normal shielded twisted pair, even has a grounding wire as part of the cable itself. That's not something you would commonly see on there, is that grounding wire. So we know that there's something special about this shielded device, and indeed that that is something special, is that we need to protect against some type of interference. And the reason that we would have interference is because the answer C, the network is part of a manufacturing facility. If you're dealing with this on a floor of a manufacturing facility, there's a lot of equipment using a lot of high voltage. There's a lot of electrical noise on the network. So you want to be able to protect the signal as much as you can. That's a perfect place to be using something like STP, shielded twisted pair, so that you can minimize the interference of the networking signal that's going through the network. So if you answered C, the network's part of a manufacturing facility, you got that one absolutely right. Now, this probably does allow for network throughput, but it could allow for faster throughput than 1 gigabit per second. So, and this would not be the best description of this cable either. The shielding should jump right out at you. That shielding should tell you, oh, this is something special about this cable. So unfortunately, it would not be B. A was that the network connects sites that are 2 kilometers apart. And although these copper cables are very good, they will not extend to 2 kilometers. The maximum that they'll be able to do is about 100 meters. That's about it. You can stretch it a little bit more sometimes, but we're not nowhere close to 2 kilometers. So that's not going to be the right answer either. The network extends over a body of water. That could be maybe a wireless network. Well, we're looking at a wire, so we know it can't be the wireless network. And an underground 10-kilometer link is required. Not sure why I stuck underground in there in dealing with that, but that's one that we put, obviously would not be the right answer, and only 3% said, yeah, there's nothing about that makes it underground or 10 kilometers. I do have some underground Ethernet cables in my yard that I put out for my cameras, for my bird cam. We saw the bird cam in the pre-show. That's an underground cable. It's built to go underground. It has inside of it, it's designed to be completely waterproof. So I know that no water can get in there to that copper cable. So it's nice to have that underground. It doesn't last forever. I wish I could have put fiber, but you don't usually see a lot of fiber in the backyard, do you? That's all I need is for the dogs to dig up the fiber connection and break it. Not something I'm shooting for. So if you did answer C, the network part of a manufacturing facility, you got that one absolutely right. If you are watching this for continuing education credit, and this is something where you already have your Network Plus certification or you have another certification and you're gathering continuing education units for this, I will give you 1 hour of webinar credit if you follow these instructions. You need to go to the top or the bottom of the Professor Messer website. You need to click on the Contact Us link, which is really the Contact Me link. Put your name, put your email address in there. Mention that this is the August 2017 Network Plus study group, and you want to put the special code of shielded twisted pair. That is our secret code of the month, shielded twisted pair, and being able to know what that secret code is. You have those 3 things in that message to me from the Contact Us link. You have to follow this. That way I know you watched the video, because you know exactly the instructions to follow. So you need to go to the Contact Us. You need to put your name. You need to put your email address. And I will send you back an email that certifies that you must have watched this 1 hour's worth of that to have it in here. Yes, who installed the underground cable in my yard? This guy right here. I got a shovel and dug a hole, and I laid my Ethernet cable and put it in there. It doesn't have to be very deep. Mine is really just a few inches under, because I did want to need to have access to it later on, but I ran it all the way down the yard. It's got to be about 150 feet from here, from the studio all the way to the bird feeder. But I needed the cable because I didn't have power out where the bird feeder was, and I was able to power the camera that's out there with power over Ethernet. So that made it easy. Just plug it into my power over Ethernet switch, and now I've got a camera out that's powered using that cable, and I've got plenty of slack, so I can move it around the yard if I wanted to. It's a great way to do it, to have that capability. Yep, just another one of those things. Know your cables for the Network Plus exam. Very, very important. If you are working on the Network Plus exam, you're thinking, There's a lot of things I need to know about networking. I need to capture packets. I want to know more about VPNs. I want to use some of these command line tools. There is an online lab you might want to consider from my friends at GTS Learning. These are the GTS Learning live practice labs. You can find out about these at professormesser.com/netlabs, and they will provide you in your browser with a way to use these labs without affecting any of the equipment that you have. It won't affect your laptop. There's no software to install. Everything happens inside of your browser, but you're able to take an entire lab full of devices, all virtualized and ready to run, and you can capture packets like I'm doing right here, or they'll show you the design of the network and allow you to work with that. If you go to the GTS Learning website and you want to use these labs and buy them directly from GTS Learning, it's $169. But my friends at GTS Learning have given you a special discount if you follow this link, professormesser.com/netlabs, and the price is only $109. And that gives you a year's access to all of the labs. They've got plenty of information to read up on them. They've got videos that describe their functionality. You can find all of that available at professormesser.com/netlabs. I want to thank my friends at GTS Learning for making these labs available at the discounted price. Maybe that's something you'll be able to use for your Network Plus studies. Let's get another question in before we run out of time in this first hour. This question is, which of these would be the best way to separate wireless users into separate broadcast domains? One of these would be the best way to separate wireless users into separate broadcast domains. Would it be STP? Would it be VLAN pooling? Would it be split horizon? Would it be static IP addressing? Or would it be poison reverse? One of those is going to be the best way to do it. I would think that there would be multiple answers there. That would be the best way to do it, but you've got to find the one that would be the best way. And if you think you know the best way, you can go to professormesser.com/QA and you can answer that one. Again, no answering in the chat room. You want to answer right now to have that there. Oh, I was wondering, I was looking at how cool or warm it is. The studio is getting a little warm. I'm thinking I turned it down and made it cold before we got going here, but it hasn't seen me move lately. It's over on the other side of the room. I'm usually walking by. It hasn't seen me do anything. So it thought I left. So it turned off the air conditioning. I think it's really warm. Now the air conditioning's back on. We can finish. How are we supposed to get anywhere with doing this? This is really bad, though. Yeah, in the chat room thinking, the answer I was looking for, not in your list. And that can actually sometimes happen. CompTIA sometimes will intentionally take the most common one and not even give you that as an option. So you may, in your mind, before you even see the answers, oh, I know what I do. I would do this. Wait, it's not listed. So you have to find what would be the best way given the options that are available, which is really every question you have to answer given the options that are available. You don't have a way to add more to the question or add more to the answers. Each question is its own little world. You have to interpret only the information they give you. Don't go outside the scope of what they give you. And even if you don't like the answers, that's too bad, because they asked you which of these would be the best way. The answer that probably is the most common, maybe it's not available to you. Well, we're sort of making the whole thing up as we go. The entire question's fake. It's not a real world. So that could certainly be one of those things. Let's see how we did with this one. 69% said VLAN pooling, and that's probably the one that's well above anything else. 14% said split horizon. 10% said static IP addressing, and 6% said STP. That STP keeps popping up in every question. And it's not even always STP. Sometimes it's STP whenever we look at that and dealing with that. And in the chat room, a very common question, which is, it's wireless. What do VLANs even have to do with that? Well, I'm glad you asked. They have a lot to do with wireless and being able to work through those and trying to break through what the answers might be with this. Even on wireless networks, and especially on wireless networks, you tend to sometimes have a lot of people in a very confined space. Think of going to a concert. Think of going to a football game. Think of going to an industry trade show where there's 1,000 people sitting in a single room. That's a very common place to have a wireless network. Well, you can't take 1,000 people and put them in the same subnet. And first, it's extremely difficult to manage an IP address space when you have subnets that are that large. but it's also difficult to have all the broadcasts associated with that. Again, we're talking about broadcast domains when we talk about VLANs, and you have all those devices sending broadcasts. It would very quickly overwhelm if you have 1,000 devices. That's why we often say your VLANs or your subnets need to be relatively small, something that you can manage. And when you're on a wireless network, if everybody connected to the same wireless network, well, that would be a little bit of a challenge. We have these wireless controllers, though, that are able to configure and manage what's happening on these wireless networks. And a very common way, as people connect to the wireless network, you may have your controller put people into separate VLANs, maybe have it do a load balancing between different VLANs, maybe fill up one VLAN and then put another VLAN. And it's really your controller that's doing that using VLAN pooling. It's one wherever you start to get into managing so much of this information of people using the wireless networks, you need to find some way to separate it out so that you're not overwhelming. Imagine if all 1,000 people try to do that all at one time, nobody gets anything done. So the VLAN pooling allows you to set up separate broadcast domains. They might even be over separate frequencies, or they might be in the same frequency, and being able to work through that. So everybody, as they connect to the network, is put into a VLAN that spreads out all of the broadcast domains into separate VLANs so you don't have an overwhelming amount of broadcasts on any particular VLAN. So that's why, as some people were saying, it's wireless. Do we really use VLANs? Absolutely, we use VLANs on wireless so that we can manage all of those and get it going there. And in fact, I try for 50%, but in this case, 68% of you got the question absolutely right. It was B, VLAN pooling. STP, as we mentioned earlier, in this particular context would be spanning tree protocol. Spanning tree protocol is used to prevent loops on a switched network. This would not have anything to do with separating wireless users into broadcast domains, so that would not be the correct answer. Split horizon is used with routing to be able to prevent routing loops. Completely different kind of loop, but a loop nonetheless, and nothing that applies to wireless users and broadcast domains. Static IP addressing technically could be used for this. You could put a separate IP address, a separate IP subnet for the people connecting to the wireless network, where people would be in their own VLAN based on their IP address. But we're talking about the best way. And when we're talking about thousands of users, and in fact, users that may be just showing up, that you don't even know who they were prior to getting onto the wireless network, it's really difficult to set up a static IP address. It's practically impossible to do something like that. So that would not be the best way to separate wireless users into separate broadcast domains. And nobody chose poison reverse, another way to prevent sending out routes over a network, dynamic routes over a network that have already been received across that network. So we don't send those out if we heard it from a particular link. This is one where with VLAN pooling, that wireless controller is in charge now of determining who goes on what VLAN, and we might probably do it with an even distribution. Or we might fill out one VLAN and then put people into a separate VLAN. We've got a lot of control over this and being able to work through it. And that's why VLAN pooling works so well in those very, very large environments. A very specific use case, obviously. If you've got thousands of users, that's your use case. Not everybody has that they would have to worry about and work through those there. Question in the chat room was about the Network Plus book, the Course Notes book. I mentioned I've got the PDF version that you can buy now. I'm getting my first physical copy of that book on Friday. So I will be able to look through the book, and if on Friday everything looks okay with the physical book, I'll flip a switch online and you'll be able to order a physical version of that book on Friday. So it'll be available shortly on the website. Keep looking out for that. I think we got time to get through one more question. I want to do one more. Here we go. We'll talk about switching, more specifically switch spoofing. I'm not going to tell you what switch spoofing is because that's kind of part of the answer. But the question is, which of the following would be the best way to prevent switch spoofing? Which of the following would be the best way to prevent switch spoofing? Would it be A, disable trunk negotiation, B, force tagging of the native VLAN, C, enable LDAP, D, configure STP, E, change the native VLAN ID? One of these would be the best way to prevent switch spoofing. Switch spoofing. Those of you in the chat room asking how many pages in the book. It's exactly the same as the PDF. In fact, when you buy the book, you also get the PDF automatically. So there's an introduction of a number of pages, a table of contents. The actual course notes are 65 pages long. So that should give you an idea of the size of the book. All in color, all printed, all shipped to you. When you buy it, I will start the process. They're made on demand. So I put your order in, it makes it and sends it out in a couple of days. And while it's happening, you immediately get access to the PDF version. So that's a little bonus. If you get the book, you get both, really. Being able to work through that. So you have a physical version, and then you've got an electronic version you can put on your mobile devices and take around with you. Which of the following would be the best way to prevent switch spoofing? I'm going to sneak a peek how we're doing. I had some good questions for you guys this week. Really sorry, this month. I try to make them kind of hard. I try to make these questions. I'm trying to get 50% of you to get this right. And I'm trying to get, well, on the other side of things, I'm trying to make half of you get it wrong. I want you to be able to learn something as we're going through these. Sometimes people will send me emails after this saying, those were too hard. I try not to make them too hard, but I try to make them hard enough that you get them wrong. Because if everybody got every question 100% right, this would be really a boring thing to go through. I want you to think about the questions, know what the answers are associated with. I'm asking a lot of you. I take this to the next level. I'm not just asking you what the definition of an acronym is. I'm asking you how they're used. And I think the exam really forces you into that way of thinking. So I want to get you thinking that way as well. Get ready for that on your exam. Let's see how we did with this one. What's the best way to prevent switch spoofing? It's a tie for first. Effectively across the board. 30% said force tagging of the native VLAN. 18% said change the native VLAN ID. 16% said disable trunk negotiation. 25% said to enable LDAP. I'm obviously not doing these in order. And 10% said to configure STP. Keeps coming up, doesn't it? Keeps coming up with this one. So let's talk about switch spoofing and how this switch spoofing works. This is something you will run into. If you're working with switches, it's a significant security concern. As you might think, you hear the term spoofing, there must be something odd going on. Switch spoofing is used to accomplish VLAN hopping. This is something that should not be happening on your switch networks, where you assign somebody to a particular VLAN and somehow they're able to hop and communicate to a device on a different VLAN. That should not happen unless you are allowing communication to happen through a router. But in VLAN hopping, they're bypassing a router and communicating directly to or from a different VLAN. And since we often use VLANs to separate things on the network, that's a bad thing when that happens. There's two common ways to perform VLAN hopping. One is with switch spoofing, and the other one we'll not talk about today is double tagging. But if you watch my video, which is 3.2 VLAN hopping, that's where I describe both of these methods and give you a graphic that describes it. Switch spoofing is when you make your device look like a switch. Normally, your device looks like a computer. It looks like a laptop. It looks like a desktop computer. It looks like a device, normal device on the network. It looks like an access device in Cisco parlance. But there is a way to configure switches to tell it to auto-negotiate if I happen to plug in another switch. It's an easy way to administer the network. So if you get a new switch, you can plug it in and automatically both switches realize, oh, you're a switch, I'll start doing some trunking between these two. Well, a bad guy can take advantage of that because now you're acting like a switch. You can now encapsulate anything you'd like into a VLAN tag, send it to the other switch, who then thinks that it's on that VLAN. What a great way to avoid any type of VLAN security. You can effectively pretend you're on any VLAN you'd like by doing that. So a best practice from a network administrator's perspective is to disable any of that negotiation functionality. Do not have your switch automatically determine, is this an access device or is it a switch trunk? You should instead tell the switch, this person who's plugged into this interface is an access device. This thing plugged into this interface is a switch, and it should not be a way to do that. There should not be a way to fake the switch or fool the switch or spoof it into thinking you're something else. So in our case, disabling that trunk negotiation is the best way to prevent this very specific kind of VLAN hopping called switch spoofing. If you answered A, 17% of you, I didn't get 50%, I'm really sorry. If you answered A, disable trunk negotiation, that is the way to make sure that you're disabling that switch spoofing capability. If you have somebody who's doing double tagging, if you force tagging of the native VLAN, that's a very common way to prevent double tagging. This question was about switch spoofing and not double tagging. Both of those, by the way, are in the exam objectives. You should know the difference and how to mitigate each one of those separately. Enabling LDAP has nothing to do with switch spoofing. It has to do with some type of authentication process. Configuring STP, well, I had to have STP in here, right? That, of course, as we mentioned before, spanning tree protocol prevents loops on a switch network, has nothing to do with switch spoofing. And changing the VLAN ID, native VLAN ID, is another way to help mitigate double tagging, not a way to help mitigate switch spoofing. The only answer here that has anything to do with preventing switch spoofing is A, disabling the trunk negotiation. And although 20% of us got that one right, hopefully the other 80% of us learned all about switch spoofing and what we can do to resolve those switch spoofing problems on our network. Hopefully you've been able to resolve it as well. Well, we've come to the end of another hour of Network Plus questions. Can you believe it? We got through quite a few, though. We were able to go through a lot of detail with the questions this month. Hopefully you didn't think they were too hard. I've got plenty more next month. Join us again. It's September the 13th. I got another hour of Q&A ready to go for you and make that happen. You can find out more about when the next study group will be on my calendar, professormesser.com/calendar. So if you're seeing this well after September 13th on a replay, you can always go to the calendar and find out when is the next live event. Our next Network Plus study group is in September, but you're more than welcome to join us next week at this time. We've got Security Plus next week. That's right, Security Plus. So I've got Security Plus questions to go through, and they'll be this hard. I'll try to make them this difficult. Stick around, though. I've got another hour. I'm going to turn on the phone lines. You're welcome to call in. I'm going to just open them up. Open phone lines. You can talk about anything. You can talk about the weather. You can talk about me putting cable in the ground. You can talk about sports, although I probably won't follow you very much. You can talk about music. You can talk about anything but current events. Let's not talk about current events. Let's talk about course notes and talk about networking and talk about technology or anything else. That'll be something fun that we can do when we work through all of those. I've got plenty more, though. You don't have to wait for the next live event. You can find out what's going on Twitter, on YouTube by going to professormesser.com/Twitter, professormesser.com/YouTube. We just passed 200,000 subscriptions on my YouTube channel. I still can't believe it. Mrs. Professor Messer can't believe it. We're so thankful to you. Thanks for joining. Thanks for subscribing. Thanks for hitting those buttons on the YouTube. Don't forget about my course notes at professormesser.com/NPCN for Network Plus course notes. My thanks again to the folks at GTS Learning. Use this link to get the special pricing at professormesser.com/netlabs. And of course, the calendar is always there. You can find out when these live events go on and this nonsense. It really gets a little weird in the second hour. This will be good. Stick around for that. On the live stream stays open. The phone lines go up. We got plenty going on. Thank you so much for your ongoing support. Thanks for attending this. We will see you next time on the Network Plus Study Group. I did say anything you can see on the screen, you operating, you working with an application is OSI Layer 7. That is what I said. I see somebody trying to catch me in a lie, trying to catch me in a discrepancy in working through that. But you're not gonna. I am the OSI king. I think the best way to learn OSI layers is do packet captures and look at it in a packet count like Wireshark. Just grab Wireshark, grab some packets. It practically layers the OSI layers for you in the decode. It's a great way to do that. Okay, let's get the phone lines open. I'm talking here, and I should be working. Why am I not working? Let's get some things going.
Thank you for calling.
Well, you're welcome. I'm just going to try to figure out. I know it wants me to enter a thing, and I'm not sure I have. Oh, wait, here it is. I've got to figure out what the numbers are. Whoops. It's probably complaining about this right now because I have to log in. Let's go to my shows. Let's start a show. I'm going to host it. I'm the host. I know.
Goodbye.
Oh, look, that was really abrupt, wasn't it? That was, to be fair, it was my fault. I am so sorry. Let's call you back. And I'll put the number in again, I promise. We'll do it right this time.
Thank you for calling.
You're
Recording
welcome.
Studios host
And we've got to put this down. And I got to put the number of the thing in. See, I don't have anybody that really helps me with this. This is really about me.
Enter your 6-digit PIN number.
There we go. And I'll type in this with the thing and that thing. And it should say,
Welcome.
see, welcome. And now you are able to call in if you want to. You don't have to. I'll also take questions in the chat room. To have this here. The chat room I'm watching on professormesser.com/live. It's the live event chat, or you can call me 855-785-7545 in the continental United States of America. That's toll-free number. If you are on Skype outside the continental U.S., or you just like to use Skype, you can call me for free on Skype, no Skype minutes, by putting a +1 and then 855-785-RJ45. That's right. +1 855-785-7545 there in the chat room. I do play a musical instrument. I just got a new musical instrument. You can't see it. It's just off the camera over there. I got a new piano. I used to play piano for weddings. Can you believe it? Back in the day, back when I was a young kid, back before I was married, I played piano for weddings because I thought I could pick up chicks that way. That's right. I would play my Lionel Richie and my Chicago. I would play my Air Supply. And I'd, yes, well, that's the way. I also played trombone in school, but I haven't picked up a trombone in a long time. But I just got a new digital piano. And it's amazing what the technology's done in a very short period of time. Very remarkable what you can do. You can have your iPad. Now everything's on the iPad. You can play music through your iPad through the device using Bluetooth. You can have your backup band playing as you're playing. You never had that at the weddings. I do not play air guitar. I got out of that business really quick, but we've got people on the phone lines. Oh, how do you know when you're prepared enough for the Network Plus exam? Go through the exam objectives. Grab the objectives. Make sure you know everything there is on those objectives. They tell you everything in the objectives. You can download the latest objectives at professormesser.com/objectives. And now we can go to the phone lines. It's the 512 area code. Are you there, caller? I hear myself.
Good afternoon, Professor. How are you doing today?
I'm good. Who am I speaking with?
This is George from Austin, Texas.
Oh, welcome, George. Well, what can we do for you today?
Well, first of all, I wanted to thank you for everything you've done. I'm going to have to go download the new extended version of the course notes here in a little while, so I wanted to thank you for that.
Oh, yeah.
Everything else that you've done.
Took weeks to redo those, so please get your hands on them. They're really good.
I appreciate that, and also wanted to thank you. You did help me study and pass the Security Plus, and like you, I'm going backwards. I started with Security Plus, and now we're at Network Plus.
Yep.
I did have a bit of a technical question for you. I guess I don't need the direct answer. I'm looking for the, I guess, logic, because I don't understand how to answer the question. So I had a question recently on a practice test that gives you a network. It's a /24 network, and it gives you 4 subnets, and there are a certain number of computers on each subnet. And I understand how to get that answer and how to through CIDR notation. Okay, you get the number of computers that is most related to a certain CIDR notation, so you're not wasting space.
Yep.
But what I don't understand of the question, the final part of the question is, what is the remainder? And I just didn't understand the logic of how you find the remainder.
A remainder of what exactly?
It was looking for the remaining networks.
Okay.
So, and I guess the CIDR notation for the remainder, the remaining networks.
Well, we can. I'm assuming I don't have the question, and you've given a lot of good detail. So I'm going to assume that the question is one where you've now worked through and we've probably all seen these questions before, is that you've worked through what an optimal subnet mask would be for this network, because they've given you these 4 networks. One network has 100 devices, one network has 200 devices, one network has 50 devices, and you have to come up with a subnet mask that fits for all of those, and you come up with the answer. And what they're probably saying is that now that you've come up with the proper subnet mask, and you've assigned it to these 4 networks, now that you've got a subnet mask, you've not only subnetted and found the optimal number of hosts, but you've also now subnetted out and created a number of available networks to use. And you're using, 3 or 4 of them in the question itself. But there are some, at least in this particular question, they are intimating that perhaps there are some networks, some subnet IP addresses you have not used yet. So imagine if you added another network onto that router, into that equation, into that problem that you've been given, what IP address would you assign to that one? And they're trying to make you go through the process of not just understanding what the IP addresses would be, but there's some other networks you could start assigning, some other IP subnets you could start assigning. It sounds like that's what they're looking for.
That sounds correct, and I think maybe the piece that I was missing is maybe I actually need to. I guess I was doing this problem all in just the higher order number, so to speak. I think maybe turning it into binary might help see that answer come out a little bit more.
They give you a starting point with these questions where they've given you an IP address and a subnet mask. Ideally, they've given you a starting point, or they're making you assume what the starting point is. You're finally getting to an end point, so you're borrowing some bits to get to that point. It's that part in the middle, and you're absolutely right. Do the binary math on that. You'll see the bits that are left over in the middle of that you borrowed across. Those are the ones you're using to create the subnet ID. Those are the ones you would have to figure out. Now, where do I put those, and how do I count those out to be able to know what the next network address is going to be?
Gotcha. Well, I appreciate it, and I appreciate you taking the time to answer. I know it's a pretty technical question.
Thanks, George. I appreciate you calling.
Thank you. You have a good afternoon.
You too. It's one of those IP addressing, and by the way, for those of you working on subnetting and IP addressing, you do need to know it for the Network Plus exam. But one of the things I tell people is that if you look at the exam objectives, it's a very small piece of the exam. A lot of people will spend days going through and trying to get subnetting right in their brain. And ultimately, you do need to know subnetting, and eventually something snaps, something clicks, and you suddenly realize, oh, that's how that works. It's really not as hard as we almost make it when we're trying to explain it. The thing, though, is don't spend so much time on that you neglect the other parts of the Network Plus exam objectives. There is an entire exam left. You might get one question about subnetting. You might get no questions about subnetting, by the way, because there's so much other content. You might get 2 or you might get 3, but you probably won't get more than that, given the number of questions that you have, the percentage associated with that, and how much of the percentage is in the domain to be able to work through that. So just a little tip, make sure you go through and understand subnetting if you have the time, but don't let it use up all of your study time to be able to do that. Once you know it, though, those of you that have had the click and now you get subnetting, they're almost a gimme question at that point. I know it's kind of crazy because when you start studying it, like, dude, how am I ever going to figure this out? And then all of a sudden, when it clicks, you're like, oh, I got it. Oh, that's an easy one. I at least got that question right, because it can only be one thing. I love math questions because there can only be one answer. It's got to be that answer, because math can't be any different. It's a 1 or a 0. It's always a 1 or a 0. And able to work through those. Let's go back to the phones. The 561 area code. Are you there, caller? What's your name?
Hi, I'm Ed from Miami.
Hey, Ed. Welcome.
Thank you. I'm studying currently for the 401 exam, so that's a security question I have for you.
All right, hit me.
Okay, it's an article that I saw in a paper recently where a tech firm from Israel helped the FBI hack into an iPhone.
Right.
And I'm just curious. Yes, and I'm just curious if you have any idea how they may have been able to do that.
They are not mentioning how they are able to do that. It's an interesting one, and it's for those of you not maybe a lot of people are surprised by this. Is that the security experts in Israel? It's probably the primary spot for security technology these days. There's a ton of innovation coming from Israel from an IT security perspective. And one of the things, if you've ever gotten, there's a document that Apple makes for their developers, for people that are making apps for the iPhone. And it's a white paper on the security of the iPhone. It's a fascinating read if you can grasp all of it. I couldn't possibly figure out everything that's in this document they give you, but they do describe at a very high level. Here's how we implement security in the iPhone that makes it so that when your data is on there, if you don't have your passphrase, if you don't have a way to get into the phone, if that phone's locked, nobody's going to get their hands on that data. Well, apparently that's not exactly true on whatever version of iOS and whatever version of hardware was being used by this particular phone that the governments wanted access to. And so with anything, with our operating systems, with our servers, with Linux, with Windows, with Mac OS, we have these operating systems that are very secure. But as I mentioned in my Security Plus course, there are vulnerabilities inside of those operating systems, inside of our browsers, inside of this equipment that we use that we don't even know yet. And the bad guys are trying to find those vulnerabilities, take advantage of them, and gain access to these systems in ways that nobody was expecting, certainly not in the normal ways. And in this case, they're not telling us a lot about how they got into that phone, but we can kind of guess that what they managed to do was find a vulnerability in Apple's security associated with whatever combination of software and hardware that they happen to have on that iPhone. And they were able to take advantage of it. They were able to get around one of those security features that Apple put in. And now, of course, Apple has to figure out what that vulnerability is if they haven't already and patch that. It's effectively a 0 day. It's a 0 day attack because nobody knows about that vulnerability except those very smart people in Israel at that security firm who did find the vulnerability and were able to take advantage of it. And it is certain interesting things. In the chat room, people are saying, oh, it could have been this, it could have been that. They could have frozen the RAM. They could have done this. And there's a lot of different techniques you can use to do that. We don't know exactly which one they chose or which one they used. But one of the things that you'll notice with Apple is each iteration of their hardware and each time they update their software, there's something new in it that makes the iPhone even more secure. They're really working towards this box that is completely impenetrable, and they're getting pretty close. They're doing a pretty good job right now, but nobody really knows how they did it in this particular case. But it's one that everybody's watching to know, is my phone secure or not, and what should I be doing to make it more secure?
Well, it's interesting because apparently I would assume that this phone did not have biometric authentication because the people are claiming that they've just forgotten their passcode. And if even that were true, if they had biometric authentication, they could simply put their finger on the phone and unlock it.
This is one of the things that's a little bit of a unique legal thing, at least in the United States, is that your passphrase, if you're putting a code in for your phone, it's a private piece of information, it's in your brain, and you cannot be compelled legally to give up that information. However, your fingerprint legally is considered something that's public. So the authorities can legally require you to unlock your phone with a fingerprint if that's how your phone is locked. That's why a lot of people who are security technologists will tell you, if you don't want the government getting into your phone, I don't want to go too crazy with the conspiracy theories. You don't want your government getting into the phone, or really anybody getting into the phone. Don't protect it with a fingerprint, because then they can compel you on the side of the road. You have to give up your fingerprint by law, because it's something that's public. It's on the outside of your body, and that's just the way the legal system in the United States works associated with that. And that's why you'll notice in the latest version of Apple's iOS that after a while, your fingerprint stops working. If you don't put in your passphrase in your phone, after a certain amount of hours, the phone will no longer accept a fingerprint. And that's why, because in the United States, your fingerprint is public information. There's no requirement by the law to get any type of special access to your fingerprint. So one of the things that they do is, one of the things Apple did is effectively time out your fingerprint, so that you have to occasionally type in the code. So if the authorities get your phone and it's been a couple of days and they come to you and say, give me your fingerprint, you can give them the fingerprint, but they still can't get in the phone because now your fingerprint doesn't work anymore. It's very, very interesting, the give and the take, the spy versus spy that's going on there.
Yeah, that is interesting. I just recently got a Google phone, and the same thing happens here. I mean, I can use biometric authentication to unlock it, but that only works for a while. Then they require a passcode in addition to that.
This is why it just happens to be the legal environment we find ourselves in the United States. Probably that way in other countries as well, but that certainly addresses that particular idiosyncrasy of our bodies and our phones and our data at this point.
Yeah, so it's interesting that authentication method makes your phone less secure.
Yes, and in fact, that's one thing that if you ever go to a security event, you talk to security professionals, that's the first thing they tell you is turn off biometrics. First, they don't work very well as a security tool. And on top of that, it makes your data much more vulnerable to people who would like to gain access to it.
Well, listen, I appreciate all that you do for everyone here. You're doing a great job. And again, thank you.
Thanks, Ed. Appreciate the call. That's one that whenever I deal with security, for those of you not familiar, I worked in the IT security industry for years, primarily with next generation firewalls and other technologies. And that's one thing you just run into on and on. There's this tight link between legalities and technology. It's really a challenge to figure out those pieces and make that happen. Let's go back to the phones, to the 447 area code. Are you there, caller? What's your name? I hear myself, caller. Are you there?
Hello.
Hey, what's your name? You might want to turn that stream off.
Hello, I'm Rizwan bin Sulaiman calling from London, and I'm calling regarding a concern. I'm actually now finishing my BSc in computer science, and my interest is in security. So now next year I'm gonna apply for MSc in cybersecurity anyway. Nice. After my graduation completed. Yeah. So my confusion is will it help me to get any kinds of certification? Right now I don't hold any certification, but I'm trying to get, and I'm preparing myself to get CompTIA Security Plus certification maybe within 2 months. So as I am doing my BSc in computer science, and maybe after finishing BSc I will do MSc in cybersecurity, without having certification on networking or Network Plus or A Plus, all those certifications, I'm getting straight away to CompTIA Cyber Security Plus. Will it help, and is it okay to go this way? Or do I need to, because I have basic knowledge on networking, we have got all those knowledge on our university. So does it work, or is it okay to go like that?
It's really, it depends on what you're going to be doing. The question specifically is, and this happens a lot because the computer science world of things is a little different than the IT. Whenever we talk about computing in general, we tend to put things into two very large buckets. One part of it is computer science, which is really focused on building systems, building software, building hardware, and managing those systems. It deals a lot with programming and a lot with development. There's also the other side of technology, which is information technology, which is effectively everything else. It's workstation management, server management, networking, IT security, which is a little different than computer science security. There is database management. There's everything else, effectively. You're not programming and creating hardware, you're doing IT. That's a very simplistic separation of those duties, but that is kind of how the industry looks at things currently anyway. For you, if you're going through a computer science program, then you're probably doing a lot of programming. You're probably working a lot with developing new systems, even developing hardware, integrated circuits, making sure you're able to build ASICs, being able to program and develop those. There's a lot of very interesting operations to deal with that. Security Plus, however, is very focused on IT security. Being able to manage a firewall, being able to understand how an intrusion prevention system works, being able to understand the processes and procedures for somebody who's trying to protect a network, and almost no aspect of programming, almost no aspect of development. There's certainly no idea of how the specifics of how ASICs are created or any type of other hardware and working through those. That is a completely different world. However, what you may find is that some employers would like you to have a Security Plus certification as the base of your IT knowledge and security. You see this a lot, although you're outside the United States. In the United States, our federal government prefers that you have a fundamental set of certificates whenever you work in IT for the federal government. One of those fundamental certificates is the Security Plus. So I often see people getting their Security Plus to work in IT for the federal government. They may not even necessarily be part of the IT security world, but they need that certification because the employer would like them to have that certification. And you may run into that particular scenario as well. The information that's in Security Plus, I think, applies whether you're going into a computer science role or IT, but probably more on the IT side. It's one of those situations where it's really going to depend, what do you do once you get your formal education, you get that master's in cybersecurity? Are you going to be breaking out and determining how viruses and worms operate? Are you going to be doing some type of development on creating the hardware and software for an intrusion prevention system? Or are you going to be managing the intrusion prevention system? Those are the two sides of the coin. So you're going to need to, it may be that you wait a little bit until you get a little bit closer to your final graduation, and then you'll be able to decide, is this going to be a certification that's worthwhile? Ultimately, it may be the employer. Ask your employers, is this something I need to have? And if they say yes, then, well, you need to get that certification. That kind of answers the question for you.
Thank you for your answer. But I just want to be ensured that, as I'm also focused on cybersecurity on my MSc, and I like the security part rather than coding and all those things. I like in security. So I'm not going to networking courses. I also find some course in MSc that's focused on networking. I'm going through cybersecurity that focus on cybersecurity and on the job field. So I want to know if I have a MSc on the cybersecurity, and with that I have CompTIA cybersecurity certification, but I don't have networking and all the other certifications, because security also for concern about network. So does it conflict, or is it okay if I go like that?
I think you've got a pretty good idea. I think getting knowledge on both sides of the coin can only help you. You've got a case where you're going to know a lot about the development and creation of technologies that help protect the network and the devices. It only helps you if you have that security knowledge. You had also mentioned getting knowledge in networking. And in some ways, I would say that knowledge in networking may be even a little bit better for you, because as I've mentioned before in my Security Plus study groups, IT security is really a very strong foundation in networking with the security aspects layered on top of it. You can't be very good, or you're not going to be very good in IT security if you don't already have a very good foundation in networking, because you're dealing with integrating devices at layer 2, at layer 3, at layer 1. You're talking about devices that manage things at layer 7. You're setting up IPsec tunnels. There's a lot of dynamic routing configurations that you're doing. There's a lot of different aspects to security, but all of it seems to have a foundation in networking. So the more you know about networking, the better you're going to be in security, whether it's computer science or on the IT side. And if you end up also getting the Security Plus, that's a great primer into the security world. So why not get another certification that's going to provide that? I don't think you can go wrong either way.
Thank you very much. I got the answer, and I really appreciate your YouTube channel and your website. Thank you very much for your hard work.
You're very welcome, and I appreciate you calling. Thanks so much. That's one of those where I do run into that also from time to time. I want to thank you for those, by the way. I was having a problem. I made some changes to my website this weekend. Some of you noticed this because my website became unavailable at certain points of the day yesterday and today. I'm very particular about this. So I rolled back the changes before the study group, so we should not have any more problems until I make some dramatic updates to my servers. But one of the things is I called into support, and one of the people, the support engineer I got at my ISP is somebody who passed their Network Plus on their way to getting this particular job. And now they're answering my phone to help me with the problem. So I was able to help them with their certifications. And then as the full circle, they were now able to help me with the problems I was having today and ultimately help you because I was able to get the website up and running again. And now we were able to have our study group with this. So that was a kind of nice circle to have there. And I never take that for granted. I really do appreciate that. It's the best job ever to be able to do this because I know it's sort of a win-win. I'm having a great time doing this, and you're getting something that can help you get a job or get a better job. That's a win-win every time, I think. Let's go to the chat room. There were a number of questions that came through in the chat room. Some of you were talking about layers of NetBIOS. What layer does NetBIOS operate at? And this is one, by the way, that it probably even straddles a couple of layers, but you often see NetBIOS. The traditional NetBIOS is something that operates at layer 2. It doesn't have a layer 3 protocol associated with it. It's not routable. NetBIOS is just a plain NetBIOS as it was originally implemented, is just sat in a Ethernet or token ring frame and went across the network. And then the only way you were able to get it across the network was to bridge it, which are the older versions of switches that we used to use. So whenever you hear somebody talking about NetBIOS, they're really talking about a layer 2 protocol. Now you'll notice that in Windows, Microsoft encapsulated it inside of layer 3. So that's why I said it kind of spanned a couple of layers there. We're able to use NetBIOS, but because it's inside of layer 3, what we're effectively doing is sending it across the network as layer 3. Windows is breaking it out and using it at that point as a layer 2 protocol. So they're kind of spoofing it, kind of extending the capabilities of NetBIOS by putting it inside, encapsulating it within a layer 3 packet and being able to send it across and make that happen. So that's one of those things that depends on how you mean NetBIOS. NetBIOS has been used in many different ways throughout the years. And that's most often, though, it's a layer 2 protocol. If somebody asked me just pick one, I'd pick layer 2. Another question in the chat room: how do you go about purchasing a hard copy of my Network Plus course notes? My Network Plus course notes are currently only available in PDF form, something you've probably seen if you've gone to the page. I just got this new version created that's 65 pages where I took every bullet of every video. It is you can't get a more complete set of course notes because it has everything inside of it now. That's based on the input you gave me. You said it's got all the pictures, but I need all the text. So I said, okay, I'm going to give you everything. And that's why it's 65 pages long. It took me weeks to create is because of that. Literally weeks of me sitting there and putting this into a format and getting it right on the page and finally having it as something I could use. It is currently, I just finished it this week and put it on the website in digital form. And I have now provided it. I use a third party to do the printing, and it's printed on demand and shipped directly from them. And they're fantastic, but I've just given it to them. They've just printed the first copy, and they're sending me the first copy. I need to see it first before I give it to you. I'm very picky. So I want to see this first. Does it look right? Do the pages, does everything line up the way I wanted? Is there any problem with it? I think it's going to be okay. But I received my copy on Friday. So when I get that copy on Friday, I'm going to flip through it. And if everything looks good, probably Friday night, Saturday morning, I will flip the switch on my website and you'll see links that say purchase the digital version or purchase the book and digital version combo. And there will be a new link available, and you'll be able to click that. It'll find out where you live in the world. It'll give you the proper cost for shipping. Inside the United States, shipping isn't very much, but a number of people buy internationally, and the cost is kind of expensive when you buy internationally because you have to ship. There's a lot more costs associated with it, but I give you the option. So at least you know, here's how much it would be to ship outside the United States. And you can see what those things are. So that's be looking for that Friday or Saturday. Should be online unless something is horribly wrong with that could happen. I could get the book and look at it and go, oh, that was supposed to be something completely different. Boy, did I mess that up. Let me go fix that. And if that happens, then we have to restart the whole process all over again. So far, I've been doing pretty good with this. So maybe Friday, Saturday, you'll see it available and out there. Just let me know if you're looking for it, it's not there, or you're wondering what's going on. I'll be glad to give you an update at that point. If you check Saturday and it's just not there and you're wondering, is this going to be available or not? I'll be glad to give you an update. I'll probably tweet out updates as well so that people know what's going on associated with that. Some people in the chat room also mentioning throughout the presentation, there were times when you see buffering happening. So let me give you an idea. Let me give you a feel for what's going on and how this whole thing works. There were a number, the health was really good. I get updates all the time on my screen that tell me how the communication is of the video stream. So I'm able to get updates throughout that tell me, and it alarms me and tells me when something's not going well. The way this works is pretty interesting, actually. You're looking and watching this video right now through a service on YouTube called YouTube Live. This is pretty much how all of the live streaming works across the internet, is that I am sending a video signal to a provider. I'm only sending this one video signal. I'm sending a 720p video signal to YouTube. Now, other providers, sometimes if you're gaming, you're sending a stream to Twitch, or you're sending a stream to another third party, but it's only a single video stream. So you only have to have a certain amount of bandwidth on the upload side for me to get that to YouTube. My plan is to also send 1080p eventually. I need different hardware to be able to do that. And I've already picked out what I want. I just need to buy it. That's the hard part. Now that I know I need a website upgrade, that may be pushed back a little bit. But I'm only sending that one stream, and it goes to YouTube. At that point, YouTube gets the stream, and every provider does this a little bit differently. But what YouTube does is they reformat the stream into different formats. I'm only providing them with a single 720p, but they know that they have mobile people that are connecting, you have desktops that are connecting, you have tablets that are connecting, and so they take the stream and they cut it up into these different formats and make it available to you. And because of that, there's a slight delay associated with the stream, probably a 15 to 20 second delay. I can adjust in very broad ways. I can adjust the delay. I make the delay as short as possible because we're doing an interactive Q&A. I'm asking you a question, and I'm hoping you'll be able to answer. And there's always a delay once I ask the question for you to finally start answering on my side. I see a 15 to 20 second delay. And if it's longer than that, then I'm sitting here for a minute waiting so I can show you the results. So it's helpful to have it as short as possible. So whenever you're receiving the signal and watching the video, you're watching this video being sent by YouTube. You're not seeing the original video that's coming from me. So if you're having any type of performance issues, there's buffering, there's some type of problem, it's between you and the YouTube server. So something in there is causing that buffering problem. I could have a perfectly clear connection on my side. I could be at full line rate. I could be providing high definition video, and you would still be seeing buffering because the problem is something I have absolutely no control over. It's between you and YouTube. And almost always it's a bandwidth issue on your side, or there may be a problem on YouTube's side, or there may be a problem on the internet connection in between. And sometimes, as people in the chat room mentioned, you could set it from an auto, which might be giving you 720p. Maybe you set it down to a lower bandwidth that maybe the screen isn't quite as sharp, but it's also not so bandwidth intensive. That might help. Also might help for whatever problems happening on YouTube's side. Maybe the lower resolutions are using a different process and that's working better for them. Again, I don't have any control over any of those things, but YouTube Live seems to work pretty well. Pretty happy with YouTube Live. So we're going to keep we're going to keep using that. It seems to have been one that has been very effective through the years. So until further notice, anyway, we'll keep using that one. I'm getting very few negative responses. Every once in a while, someone will run into a problem, but it's almost always something that's very localized. We've managed, hopefully, luckily here, we've managed to keep all of this running pretty well. Haven't had any significant major issues with my service provider. I've got pretty good bandwidth into the studio. I've got 100 megabit down and somewhere around 12 to 15 megabit up. Once I have my bird feeders also on this stream, for those not who've seen birdfeeder.live, that bird feeder's on the stream and it's streaming at 1080p. I'm streaming this currently at 720p. And I think even after that, I've still got 6 to 8 megabits of bandwidth available, which is pretty good. There's a little bit of extra there. So as we're thinking about the Network Plus exam and we're thinking about how do we manage these network technologies, how do we manage the applications, it's not about the network so much, it's about what we're putting on the network. We have to think about all of these. So imagine being at YouTube and having to design where all of this bandwidth is coming from. You're obviously going to want bandwidth inbound from me, but your much larger bandwidth requirement is going to be outbound to the rest of the world. Pretty interesting from those perspectives and working through it. So it's just another one of those things to work around. So I'm glad in the chat room you mentioned lowering the bandwidth worked for you. So fantastic. I'm glad that worked there, because there's nothing I can do on my side. Literally nothing I can change to make that work better for you. So I'm glad it did. Another question in chat room. What's the difference between a 1000 base T crossover, probably TX crossover, and the Yoast serial device wiring standard, or what they call the rollover cable? And it depends on what you're doing is really what that is. It kind of has a similar name, rollover versus crossover. And it's going to depend on what you're doing. If you're connecting two Ethernet devices together, I'm going to look for this image so I can show. Oh, it's probably in my course notes, right? Why don't we go to the course notes and I'll show you a rollover cable versus a crossover cable. I think I've got these in here. Whenever you're working through cabling and working through the details of cabling and getting all the right things in the right place, it becomes important that you have the right cable. Whenever I was doing systems engineering and working with equipment, one of the things that I would always find myself doing is I would have a bag full of cables. Eventually, I did have it set up so that I would have one cable, one RJ45 straight through cable, and I would just have modular ends that I could put on the ends of the cable to give me the information that I wanted. That became kind of handy to have it set up that way, I got to tell you. Obviously, an Ethernet connection is going to have a straight through cable. Pin 1 is going to go to pin 1, pin 2 is going to go to pin 2, pin 3 is going to go to pin 3. That's a normal patch cable, straight through cable. It's what we use to connect an Ethernet device to a switch, for example. Very easy. Sometimes, though, you want to connect an Ethernet device to another Ethernet device. For instance, you want to connect two computers to each other, or you want to connect a computer directly to a router. Normally, those would need a crossover cable, assuming it's not going to auto crossover, which a lot of the technology does these days. But let's assume that it doesn't have a way to automatically do that for us. In that particular case, we would need an Ethernet cable where all of the sends are pointing to the receives. So you would see the crossover cable is one where we're connecting two Ethernet devices together with each other. There are, in the world of the network administrator, however, the network professional, you're going to have times when you're going to need to connect to the administrative port of a switch, of a router, of a firewall, and almost always those console connections are going to be serial connections. They have nothing to do with Ethernet. They are the old style serial cables where there is one line that's giving you the data and one line that's receiving the data, and there's other lines that are telling the other side that it's clear to send the data. There's a whole serial connectivity there. It's how we used to set up modems to communicate with each other through these serial connections. In those scenarios, you might need a serial connection, which is a pinout that's not even covered on the Network Plus certification, primarily because there's so many different ways to do it. One very common administrative console cable is on Cisco devices. Not all Cisco devices work this way, but a large number of them, where it is a rollover cable. You can really see the difference between crossover and rollover in this view. So you've got pin 1, instead of going from pin 1 to pin 3 on a crossover, it goes from pin 1 down to pin 8, pin 2 to pin 7, 3 to 6. It really is rolled completely over from one side to the other. It was a very common way to do this because now you don't have to remember the pinouts. Now we know exactly what the pinouts are because they're simply rolled over from one to the other. This obviously would not work on Ethernet. You cannot connect this as a patch cable. It doesn't work as a crossover cable. That's just a mess. And that's why whenever I have my cable, I would use an RJ45 patch cable, and on one side of it, I'd plug in the connector that would roll it over. So I would only have to carry this tiny little adapter with me to be able to have that there. That works pretty well. That scenario, and that's really the difference between the crossover and the rollover, is being able to approach it from that perspective. Whenever I start looking at all the cables I'll need, I think when I was done, I had a straight through Ethernet, a crossover Ethernet, and it was really just an extra adapter. I wish I had one with me right now. I could show you. I made a 1-inch crossover and plugged it into a coupler. So I effectively had a 3 or 4 inch crossover cable that I could just plug in a normal patch cable, and now it was suddenly crossed over. Same thing with the rollover, is I made a 1-inch rollover and plugged it into a coupler, and now I could turn a regular patch cable into a rollover by just attaching this little 3-inch connector coupler onto the end of it, and now it turned into a rollover. And I did the same thing for serial. I had a DB9 connector, technically DE9 for those of you pedantics out there like me, that I had an RJ45 connector, and I wired the inside of it so that it would, with 2 of those on the end, wire up and have a serial connection that I could use. So I would often have a USB to serial adapter, the serial cable on one side and a serial cable on the other, and that would connect me up to my firewall. But I carried all those cables. But after a while, I really had 2 cables. I had the USB to serial, just in case I needed it, and I had a patch cable, which you can use on so many different things. You can use it in a hotel room, you use it in the lab, you can use it everywhere. And then I just had these tiny little 3-inch adapters that I would use with it. It was perfect. It worked great to have it that way. So that was a great way to carry a lot, but I wouldn't need to have it all with me. I just have them stuck in the bag, and I was good. I wouldn't have to have 4 or 5 separate physical cables. I could minimize the amount of cable, which helped when you were traveling. I go through security in an airport. They like as little wiring as possible, and they like it all very neat. Make sure it's always rolled up neatly into a circle. I make sure it's always exactly like that. When it goes through, they're able to see very clearly what that is. They never like to see a ball of wires at the airport, as you can imagine. They like to see everything neatly put in there. They don't say that much anymore. There used to be big signs about how to wrap your cables at the airport. They've now come off of that a bit. That always helped me a little bit when working through that. Well, we've come to the end of another Network Plus study group. I want to thank you for spending some time on the Q&A side or on the first hour. Thank you for your questions in the second hour. Make sure you download the exam objectives, professormesser.com/objectives. So important when you're studying for the exam that you know everything that's in those objectives. And if you do, you're going to pass the exam without a problem at all. I know you will. Thank you for joining me in the second half as well, and for calling in and for your questions. I look forward to doing another one of these next month. Feel free to check the calendar at any time and join us. And of course, throughout the month, you're welcome to send me messages and ask questions through the Contact Us link that's at the top of the Professor Messer website. Well, with that, we're at the end of another study group. Thanks for joining me. We will see you next time on the Network Plus Study Group.